board is now in process at 7:35 p.m. on February 4th, 2021. And I'll read the determination of electronic meeting. So Chapter 1283 of the Virginia 2020 Acts of Assembly addresses the ability of soil and water conservation districts to hold electronic meetings without the need for quorum being present in a single location when a state of emergency has been declared pursuant to Section 44-146, 17 of the Code of Virginia. So we're making a motion or kind of agreeing by consensus that the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District's Board of Directors has determined the nature of the declared COVID-19 virus emergency, makes it impractical or unsafe for us to assemble in a single location for the purpose of transacting business statutorily required or necessary for us to continue operations and discharge our lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities. So are we all in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. So there's a few things that we wanted to go through today. And just again, appreciate everybody's commitment to reviewing our personnel policies and updating them and really bringing them kind of over the threshold, because this is something that has been really on my list for quite some time in regards to a personal list that I've been keeping, not anything that's been authorized by the board. But just the review of this has been, in regards to our policy, has been something that we've definitely would benefit from some clarification and everything. So what I'm hoping that we can do today is definitely find agreement on our scope and approach, and look at that pretty critically and see if the schedule continues to make sense, or if there's anything that we might want to adjust accordingly, and certainly recognize that we may need to do so in the future if there's a need. And then take a look at that list, at our scope, and take a look and see if there's anything else that we might want to make sure that we're reviewing throughout this process. As you all recall, Jerry pulled together a really great list, and actually the vast majority of the things that we are going to be looking at through this process really is covered in that list. And the only thing that I think may be a little bit out is things like dress code and some of the things that might be really included under more of a standard of conduct kind of thing. But the reason for the approach is really to try to focus on some of the key elements and again provide some of those clarifications. And then we will look at some information on authorities, and I'll walk through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation and share some insights as well. And again, this is really intended to be a dialogue. We're not coming to a final decision today. This is all, we're preparing draft information to again take to the executive committee for full review, and then ultimately hope for board approval in June. So we definitely recognize that we're going to need to come to some consensus, but what I hope we can do is at least help to put some ideas down on paper, and then if we need to continue to work on things and refine things between meetings, we can certainly do that as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just, because this is our first one, my idea was to get this kind of background. So it may be that I'm one of those individuals that needs to digest a little. So as we go through this and have this conversation, my feeling is that when, for our next meeting or even in between that, I may compile additional ideas and thoughts, and then if there's a need to return to something we touched on, I just want to have the capacity to do that, because, it's one thing to think about things and read through things. It's another to have that conversation and then see how things come out of it, and to sit there and think through it a little bit more and make sure you've got a comprehensive view and you're, including everything you need to. So
Absolutely. No, and there's going to be, I would anticipate that we're going to have questions that come up, even things that we start to think about. And, you know, and that's okay. And there may be things that we might not necessarily have a full consensus on that we might want to take to the Executive Operations Committee and be clear about those areas where there may be some need for further clarification and things like that. And there will likely be things that come from the Executive Operations Committee that we also need to consider as well. So, no, it's going to be a work in progress, and I look forward to it. I think it's going to be really good. Have a really important outcome. But Monica, is there anything else from your perspective that you want to make sure, you know, we kind of address up front?
No, I think it's really good for us to just double check on the scope and the approach, to make sure that these are the priority areas that we want to, and I think we do. I think this is what your outline is good. I definitely want to start from the vantage point so that when we come, you know, what's the most pressing for the board to what might take the longest, for example, to kind of to consider or think through and make sure the full board has clarity on. So, you know, because sometimes we can see that things might take a little longer. And so if we can be cognizant of some of those items that might take more deliberation and make sure those are on the front end, so we're not leaving everything at the, you know, just to that might be, make sure that that's captured in the earlier portion of our timeline, just because I think we want to give ourselves that time and make sure we're not running out of it.
Right.
Especially if there's anything that needs additional deliberation.
No, absolutely. And I think that there may be some things that do take up a little bit. Sorry, give me just one moment, please.
I'll take your time. That's the thing when having these meetings with the kiddos at home. I've got 2 that aren't feeling well today. So I'm just like, yeah.
Oh man. Well,
it happens.
Yeah. Well, we've got soccer practice going on tonight, and of course all sorts of other things. And so
yes.
it was the all important message of, do you need dinner? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but I think that's really fair. So Monica, why don't I bring up the information here?
Yeah.
Let me share my screen. And so again, this outlines our goals. And Heather, I'm very glad that you're able to join us tonight, yes, because I think you'll lend some great perspective. And you're going to see, actually, as we go through the authorities, you also play a pretty significant role in on the personnel side as well, in terms of the administration. And so really appreciate your insights. And Chris, you know, we know that you come with quite a bit of experience as well. So looking forward to your insights as well. But Monica, in taking a look at this schedule, so really for this first month, it's kind of, there's always the point of just kind of getting into the groove of things. And so taking a look at our authority and scope, which is what we'll begin to discuss today, and then also looking at our next meeting on February 18th at the Code of Ethics, our standards of conduct and leave policies. These are areas where I don't foresee a whole lot of change being necessary, but they are important to document and really put down on paper as well. But nonetheless, I think it gives us a nice kind of ease into the system. Yeah. I do think as we head into March, these are more of the more complex conversations, certainly. But I think for the most part, a lot of this can be easily documented, and it's just making sure that it makes sense for us, if you will. So, but these could be some longer conversations, certainly.
Yeah.
This gives us a little bit of a buffer as we head into April and May,
Yeah.
and certainly into June as well. So if we needed some additional time to discuss these items, we've got the buffer set in and scheduled. So I just wanted to kind of.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I like the way that this is laid out and that this month is kind of easing us in. It's kind of more of the basics, but it allows us to lay out how we're going to communicate this to the entire board. And also, in preparation of, it gives us the ability to kind of recognize if we have pre-questions to bring to the March meeting. Like, so we'll be able to kind of flush out if that happens. Like while we're discussing this, maybe there's something that makes sense for us to ask before we jump into March at our review by the Executive Operations Committee, so.
Right.
Sounds good.
Okay. And it may be that this month we're just providing a quick update, just like we've kind of discussed with the Governance Committee, with a lot of information and a lot of stuff to digest. We may not be able to get it all compiled in time for the Executive Operations Committee, but we'll do our best. And certainly, I think if nothing else, be able to provide an update, and then in subsequent months, be able to give more meaty stuff for the Executive Operations Committee to review.
Yeah.
Is there anything else looking at this list that you feel we need to address?
I think that there's I'm going to be curious if we may need a second executive operations update. But we'll talk about that and see how that goes. I know we have one the 23rd, and we'll be able to probably lay out some very basic groundwork, but because the meat of what we're going to be presenting is throughout March, and then we have a March, I just want to make sure that there's an opportunity potentially to do a meeting if need be. Just to have it in our pocket that might be a necessity.
Okay. I think that makes sense. And maybe even just like we did in January, if we need to schedule a longer meeting.
Yeah. And just to kind of have it in the background that might need to happen, because there is quite a bit, and it may be completely unnecessary, but just to pencil it in that might.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And certainly also with the governance and board operating procedures, recommendations that are going to be coming forward with that too. There will be a lot to discuss in March. So I think that makes sense.
You almost need kind of two for separate. You've got your governance, trying to keep it separate, because I think sometimes those boundaries can get a little blurred, and thinking that it's, and I'm curious too, we'll see how it goes, but like what comes first from the governance updates or the, this.
It's definitely interesting. There's integration. Integration. And I think, which I'm glad Chris is here, because he's also sitting on that governance committee. And again, I think what we're trying to make sure is that there are consistency between those two programs. And so what we discussed today, Monica, again, we're coming up with draft, we're coming up with concept, and it may be further refined next week, with the governance committee, as well as we're kind of again, working through these processes. So, and ultimately, the executive operations committee can help to just say, okay, this is the direction.
Yeah.
So I think that's good.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, we can reevaluate again as we get into March and take a look and see if we need to again adjust the schedule a bit. There will be some activities taking place in between. So for example, the position descriptions, We're going to have the staff review the position descriptions and provide some input into those as well. But then also with the benefits review, we have our actuarial study taking place right now. And so we should have some information that takes about 90 days. And so we anticipate that it will be available in April. So we may have some real opportunity for discussing benefits as well. Again, there's coinciding conversations that are taking place. So if we need to delay on discussing benefits at the May 6th meeting, we'll have the opportunity again later on to incorporate any adjustments or changes.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So that's good.
All right, so I think we've got some agreement on the process, which is great. So with that, Monica, I'm going to jump into the little presentation that I've got. And again, I should really say here, these are proposed. This is proposed, like I said. So I'm not wedded to these. This is just pulling together some information, wanting to try to get some background information for us, again, as we're starting to move forward with thinking about what authorities we have. So first off, we do have legal authorities, and so these are taken from Virginia Code in regards to what the district director's responsibilities are and what their authorities are in terms of being able to hire employees, as well as delegating powers to employees as well. So there is some leverage in regards to what, as you can see here, district directors can delegate any and all powers to as they deem appropriate, certainly. But these are the authorities that relate to personnel and employment that are within the Virginia Code specifically for soil and water conservation district directors. We also have grant agreements with DCR, and these are some of the bits of information that we have within our grant agreements. Again, this is for our administrative and operations grant agreement. That's about the $105,000 that we receive every year. So we have to annually review and maintain our personnel documents, including, as you can see here, employee position descriptions, performance expectations, personnel policies, any authorizations for pay changes, and then also do our annual employee evaluations as well. And then within, we also need to review the district financial operations procedures and record those as well. So there's some really interesting responsibilities that we have, again, as it relates to DCR. And the main reason for why DCR incorporates these kinds of things into the grant agreement is because they maintain the liability insurance policy for all district directors, associates, and personnel. So by virtue of that, they have that policy. They don't want to use that policy. They want to make sure that we have the appropriate precautions and safeguards in place and are doing things the right way. The desktop procedures, so several years ago, it was actually referred to as a guidebook, and it was more suggestive, if you will. It was not required that thou shalt follow this. And it was probably 4 or 5 years ago, DCR switched it from a guidebook to procedures and then required that districts follow them. So these are 4 things that I pulled out of the district desktop procedures as it relates to employment. That's section 11. So the establishment of new employee positions, as well as approval of new hires, should be approved by the district board of directors and approved in the minutes. Pay rates of each employee should be discussed and approved by the board of directors and recorded in district minutes. The district should maintain a personnel file for each district employee containing essential data, and the ultimate responsibility for hiring, firing, increases, decreases in salary rests with the board of directors. And then again, use of the employee pay action approval form is required. There's more information that's in the desktop procedures that goes into these in a little bit more detail. And we follow these. I think, again, where we've run into a little bit of a challenge is really we've not clearly documented what the division of duties and authorities are for our district, and so that's what I'm hoping we can clarify. So we do have other legal responsibilities as well with following the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, Equal Employment Opportunity, and I'm sure that there are others as well that we have to follow too. So what I think we're aiming for with our personnel policies is simplicity to the extent possible, but also really trying to clarify both those authorities and the roles and responsibilities. So being able to really clearly define some of those aspects. And I wanted to provide Loudoun Soil and Water Conservation District's example of what they have in their personnel policies, which was actually approved originally back in 2013, which was probably about the time that the fiscal guidebook became fiscal procedures. But this is what they have. Now, Loudoun has a completely different setup in terms of their employment. So they don't have an executive director or a district manager associated with them. They actually have what they refer to as an administrative assistant or district coordinator. So it's set up a little bit differently, but I wanted to just show you this is what they have in their personnel policy as their designated authority. So they've set up their personnel committee, the chairman is appointed, and then they share how they make decisions. And then the administration of the program, the day-to-day operations is assigned to the administrative assistant or district coordinator, and again, under the direction of the district directors. What was that? I'm sorry?
How many staff does Loudoun have?
Loudoun has, I can actually take a look in their personnel policies because they have that written down. I think they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They have 12 positions listed, but I want to say they probably have about 6 employees.
What are the other 6?
What are the other 6?
Yeah.
I think they're just positions that they have on the books, like position descriptions that they have on the books. But right now they have about 6 employees.
That's a decent size.
Mm-hmm.
When you were counting, I thought they were bigger than us, and I wondered how that happened.
Well, they're growing by leaps and bounds out in Loudoun too. But yeah. No, they are set up a little bit differently than us, and again, because they have not really designated a district manager or an executive director, but so a little different responsibilities. Oops. Okay, so we have a number of different responsible parties within our own district as well. We have sort of set up the Executive Operations Committee. It wears a number of different hats, from being opportunities to really go into closed session for any of the reasons that is allowable under FOIA and open meeting laws, to also really sort of serving as our personnel committee. And I think this is really the opportunity to refine a little bit more what the responsibilities of that group would be as it relates to personnel. From my perspective, it's always been the group that I have turned to when there has been conversations about salary adjustments, hiring, things like that. But the difference is as we've seen in some of the conversation or the reference material, it has been me coming forward with ideas. I don't think that we've ever necessarily taken a motion on some of those things, but I do work to get consensus, and have in the past, really since we've established the Executive Operations Committee, have worked to at least use them as a sounding board. And if there's something where somebody says, no, this isn't the direction, to take that step back and certainly respect that. We have our board of directors as a whole. You have the executive director, and then you have the office manager as well. So I pulled from Fairfax County. It's been as you know, our policy has been that we follow Fairfax County's policies. And so I really do lean heavily on those, but they can be quite complex as well, which can be challenging. But I also pulled information from the district director's orientation guide. I think they call it the handbook, as well as the desktop procedures, to just sort of pull some of that information forward. Really, again, we're just focusing on authorities right now. But this is what I am suggesting in terms of proposed responsibilities. And if you're like me and you see the little panel in your corner, I'm not sure what your screen looks like, you can actually just minimize that panel if you need to, so that you can see a little bit more. So this is the challenge with trying to translate Fairfax County straight to us, is that it's challenging because of the way that we're set up with our board of directors, the executive operations committee, the role in the past role of the executive director, and then also the administration that takes place with the office manager. We sort of fulfill the roles of, certainly the board of directors fulfills that similar role as the board of supervisors. But then there's also roles that I think we need to be considering that might fall under the county executive, but some of those also fall under the roles that I've been playing, as well as the director of human resources. So it gets a little bit complicated, but what I tried to do was parse out a little bit based upon the past. But again, I'm not wedded to the past. I want to just make sure that we use that as a starting place. And if we need to make some modifications, we can certainly do that. I've also started to incorporate a few more modifications. And so what you see in orange here are some of the things that we've pulled in with respect to what has been in the director's handbook, as well as the fiscal procedures. So there were also just some gaps, things that we're already doing that wouldn't have been necessarily in the county processes, but that we do. And so I wanted to just make sure that those were incorporated in here as well.
So the only thing with the orange, I think we'd have to be very careful with how we word that. I appreciate you trying to start us from a starting point. I just want to make sure that it doesn't, right now it reads as if it would be the responsibility of the board to establish the new positions. I know it says with ED, but you know, again, this is for, I don't know how we want to have the conversation about this, because you're still just laying this out and then we come back to have that conversation. Is that what you want to do?
Yeah,
do this and then come back.
It might, but let's keep that in mind. And I think if we, again, this is not final, but I think that that's an important point. Is clarity. We're working toward clarity, because the last thing we want to do is certainly develop policies that are less clear.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know what I think here is usually the establishment of any new positions, that is a budgetary decision, and it would come to the board, and it would ultimately be the decision of the board in order to make that new position take place. Does that make sense? So
totally does.
So that's where that comes from.
I think we just have to reword it a little bit, and I only say that because the way it reads, it's just the very initial sentence makes it sound like that's not the consideration, that it's just the board saying, you know what, we need a new X person. And
And that very well may be. And again, these are full board decisions. But that very well may be, if the board decides, hey, we want a new position,
Yeah.
we'll move forward on a new position. If it is, somebody wanting to establish a new position, essentially this would just be, we would be in communication, that it would be in consultation with the executive director, so that there's a mutual understanding of expectations. Again, I think that I think if we're thinking worst case scenario, and that there isn't the communication taking place between the board and the executive director, that would be a big challenge for sure for whomever's in that position. But I see what you're saying, and we can work on that bullet a little bit more, unless you have a suggestion already.
That's one of those where I was going to say that might be me thinking about it this week.
Okay.
and giving you a suggestion maybe. I just, because, at 7:30 and 12 hours of working, I'm not really going to come out with my best stuff. But it just a suggestion. And we could provide both languages to the board full to see, because it might be one of those conversation points where I think, which sounds better, which kind of encapsulates the role more clearly, so that there's not confusion should someone come in and take this a different way, right?
Right. No, I hear you. And I think trying to capture that collaborative tone is really what we're trying to make clear here.
Yes. So I'll look at it, because it may not be, I think maybe just the establish is really a strong word. So I'm just trying to think. I'll think about it.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So really what we're seeing as sort of being the key responsibilities of the board, again, would be to ensure that our personnel is being administered in accordance with law, and all of the sound principles with public personnel management. So I think that's pretty broad. And that really trickles down through, again, the Executive Operations Committee, and to, again, the administration side with the executive director and the office manager as well. Ensuring compliance with equal opportunity laws and regulations. Essentially, again, being the responsibility of the board is to establish, develop, I don't know quite what word we would want to make, authorize the new positions as well. And then, and authorize the hiring and management of personnel, including adjustments to salary. Maybe that needs to be tightened up a little bit. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is anything new and any adjustments would need to come and be authorized by the board of directors, is essentially what we're saying. That's been our policy all along. And then to be the hiring authority for the executive director. And then this is just some, again, some language pulled from Fairfax County, publicizing and recruiting for that position, providing, formulating examinations, essentially interviews. And I put in here that district employees and partners are consulted on, because I think that's also very important. We could leave it in or leave it out. It's really up to the group, but essentially, again, it's demonstrating that collaborative approach. Not say so, and then providing and administering a grievance system as required by state law. And the grievance system actually is only required for organizations that are with 15 or more employees. I was looking into that. Nonetheless, I think it's good to have, and I think it's fair and equitable. So in cases, there is an outlet for employees to grieve or to have, share any sort of concerns. And Again, the board of directors would authorize any payment of any monetary incentives, awards, bonuses, and employees. Now, I put in here in italic that the executive director shall administer an incentive and bonus program. That's kind of, again, carried over from Fairfax County. We really do that in collaboration with the finance committee. And so it's really, we've looked at opportunities. I might suggest something, but the ultimate administration and the ultimate decision comes as a recommendation from the finance committee. It's reviewed by the executive operations committee and then is set by the board of directors as part of that budgetary process. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that a little bit. And again, we can certainly cut the checks and things like that. And I provide recommendations, but again, it's really something that's shared with all of those various committees. Does that make sense?
Should you include then that the incentive awards bonuses shall be recommended by the executive director, finance committee, and/or?
I think, I'm part of the finance committee, so I don't think it really matters that
it doesn't matter
it's explicitly.
then? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just going to actually, well, here, why don't I do this?
And your role would always remain in the finance committee from an executive director position. That's a set space, correct?
I would hope so.
Because there goes into that clarity piece, right? So like if the board said, no, we're going to make it so that the finance committee is only the board, that would make, now I don't see that happening. I'm just saying to ensure that it's evergreen, right? Like that.
Correct. Right now, our current policy is that the finance committee includes the executive director, the office manager, the chair of the board, and the treasurer.
Okay.
And it's really the treasurer that chairs that committee.
Got it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
Chris is the chair.
Question was the partners in the other bullet point. Who would that be? When
it could be county partners, it could be NRCS partners. I tried to leave it kind of broad so that it gave flexibility to the board of directors to decide who they wanted to reach out to. Basically, they would be partners of the district.
Okay. So maybe we just want to say partners of the district just to be a little more, because all of a sudden I'm seeing like, I don't know. I wasn't quite, just to be a little more tight. I think sometimes it gives enough flexibility, but still keeps it within. But we can keep it open, just as a possibility. I just got a little, but I'm new.
No, I think
for people like me, right? When we're coming in, it's also that this is seeing it with eyes that are like, I don't know, and so help me better understand.
Right. Chris, did you have something you wanted to mention?
Well, on your earlier comment where you were questioning whether you would be on the finance committee, I don't think it can exist without the executive director, so that should be part of the finance committee.
Yeah.
And our current policy is explicit, does include, again, the office manager, the executive director, the treasurer, and the chair. So, okay. Yeah. And thanks for that clarification, Chris. Appreciate that. So again, as we're looking at this, some of these things you may want to consider, authorizing them to the Executive Operations Committee. But let's jump into that one. Oh, I wanted to share this. Again, this comes from Fairfax County's personnel regulations that the final administrative authority rests with the county executive for the merit system. Their merit system is basically their classification for employees, just to ensure that they are hired on a merit-based approach. So I'm throwing this out here. I'm not sure what quite we want to do with it. But essentially it states here, just under emergency situations, that the county executive can suspend the rule of, related to personnel policies in terms of a catastrophic situation, such as what we dealt with, just a year ago. So I'm not sure how new this is in terms of this language, but certainly, again, it just demonstrates that when there is a need in a situation, that essentially the county executive, or if you wanted to translate this over to the district, that the executive director would have some authority to be able to make some compensations with the personnel regulations. So just to give you an example of how this played out, when the COVID hit, the county executive put a freeze on all hiring, as an example. So just, that's just an example of what they ended up doing and how they executed this. So I don't really want to touch this, but I think it's just something maybe to kind of keep in mind if we needed to provide some flexibility in emergency situations, that there was that opportunity to do so. So some proposed responsibilities of our Executive Operations Committee. Again, it's not explicitly called the Personnel Committee, but personnel is part of our overall Executive Operations Committee responsibilities. And I think maybe what we can do is just in our policy document, where we have the listing of our internal committees, is just designate this serves as our personnel committee as well. But these are some of the roles of the Executive Operations Committee that are, again, I am proposing that it would administer all of the employee benefits program and plans as adopted by the board of directors. This is just sort of a subset of that, where, again, this was primarily taken from Fairfax County, what we have in orange here, and I have a question mark next to. When there is a determination made, sometimes there's mid-year things that come up. It can be that the dental insurance that we have just, tripled in cost or something like that, and we need to go back out and revisit that plan, or go find a new one. The way we've handled that in the past is usually through committee. So I don't really feel as though I need to be delegated authority to make changes in the benefit options when there is, kind of mid-year, or that we would do it without bringing it to the board, because it is usually a budgetary related kind of question. I would bring that to the board anyway. Heather, can you think of any examples where we might need to think about that? I mean, would it be like open enrollment?
Possibly. I mean, I guess things like the retirement program, or something where a question comes up from staff about, or possibly a new rule comes up. I mean, like the FICRA or something like that, where we need to sort of analyze our policy and see if there are changes that we need to make. I mean, for the most part, it just goes along. We don't have too much that we need to do, but
right.
That's the kind of thing where we would need to make a decision about something like that, like the VRS versus SEP, or as you said, if the dental insurance, or they cease to cover us and we need to find something new, or we want to offer some additional coverage.
Or for example, like, would have the CARES Act, the family leave, would that have been something that would have impacted this, for example, because you would have had that extended family leave from the CARES Act based on, would that be an example of?
Well, I mean, I moved forward on pulling that language together. Heather and I did actually on you're talking about the family first.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was actually a requirement.
Yeah.
So
We didn't have really anything to discuss because they told
No.
us what we needed to do.
yeah.
Right.
But
And we brought that before the board. It had to go before the board before it could be enacted. So we did, you know, we usually do get pre-approval for things because we are planners that way, I guess. But I can't think of an example, and maybe this is benign enough now that I'm looking at it. I mean, really no change would take place until it would be approved by the board of directors anyway. But it's maybe what this is giving me is the authority to review the benefits that we have.
well, and I think also to understand the you know, sort of the benefits climate and to have feedback from staff and make those recommendations, you know, to do the
Yeah.
research and make those recommendations on, you know, what might be, you know, what we might need to bring to the board to implement. That seems very probable.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And I mean, if you feel compelled that we need to outline that there's a point person on these benefit changes, then it makes the most sense that it would be, you know, the executive director bringing that to being that authority, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it would seem to me it would be a combination of the office manager, Heather, working closely with the ED, but
Mm-hmm.
there should probably be that point of that. If the purpose of this document is to kind of lay out and really provide just a strengthening of roles, then I think it's okay to have something like this, and that can still be brought forward and discussed at greater length. But I think what we want to do is provide more and then remove it if necessary. Like, so our recommendation is, you know, we can say, you know, the purpose of this document is to make it as clear as possible that, you know, this personnel policy, it's through the executive director or, you know, would be kind of bringing this to the attention because of whatever is coming through. And then, of course, bringing it to the board for final say. But I think that it makes sense to think about that as just, because we're really trying to clarify those roles and make them robust, right? So that there's no questions. I agree with you. I don't foresee too much, but it's easier to take something off than, you know, to not have it included in this at this point in time and say, you know.
Well, and let me ask this. I mean, to put on a new pair of glasses and come in as the executive director position, right?
Yeah.
Does this meet the intent of what I do and what my predecessor has done is, you know, the board is the final approval process, right? It does take work to get to a final document that we want to have the board approve, and oftentimes it includes a lot of discussions in between. But could you see anybody, you know, any other executive director, again, not looking at the screen, not looking at me, but could they interpret this in a different way where they've got the authority to make changes? I think it's pretty clear, to be honest.
Because it says until, you know, that no change will be in effect until approved by the board.
Okay.
Right. So I don't think, but I do think this belongs more in the second bullet point than it does here, if that makes sense, because we're looking at this as the ops committee. So it doesn't, you know, it would almost be like you might want to flip this a little bit if you were going to present it in that to showcase that the committee would authorize the executive director's recommendation of benefit modifications, right? So I mean, just just because otherwise this falls more into the way it's worded right now, it would fall more under the responsibility of the executive director.
Right, which is where I just put
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
The other question that I have is, it has here, administer all employee benefits program and plans adopted by the board of directors. And so, I mean, administer is, I guess, I think of it more of the lines of managing open enrollment and things like that. And those are things that Heather, would be administering.
Right.
So is there a better word or better way of saying that?
Well, so the personnel committee is going to be made up of right now it's the executive committee. So
Right.
I think, yeah, I definitely don't see it as administer, because that doesn't make as much sense. Like, so. And
a good role of the executive operations committee would be like to review our benefits package and plan adopted by the board of directors on a biennial basis, or have some sort of, we need to have some sort of process, again, where we get into the routine of reviewing things regularly. Maybe it's once every 4 years. Maybe it doesn't need to be as frequent. But it just would be, I think, helpful.
No, I don't disagree. I do think review is a good term.
Yeah, because administer definitely sounds like the personnel committee would be managing open enrollment, which is not a bad idea.
Now,
Heather, what would you do on fall then?
I don't know.
I'm just kidding.
I'm sure I could find something.
Oh yes. Take a breath.
I think review. Since we're already going to the point of it being adopted by the board of directors, at this point it would be a review. Be a good idea.
I think we can, of course, come up with a sequence. I have no idea how often, the benefits package should be reviewed. Hopefully once, if we decide to go with VRS, that's, well, you know what, Heather, I think they do that every 2 years, don't they? They reassess the amounts. It's a budgetary kind of thing.
And I don't think that there's going to be any decisions that,
it's just
assuming we do go with VRS, they do the assessment, they send us a bill.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything that we, once we join, that we
can actually alter.
No.
The impact is probably not negligible for what influence we would have, right? Yeah. Well, I think just if we wanted to make it similar to like the reviewing personnel regulations and annually, I think it wouldn't hurt to just be like to reorient the board, to reorient members or directors to the benefits program, so that there's a comprehensive awareness of it. And maybe you do, I don't know.
I mean, to be honest, if we sequence it right, with every 4 years, then if
Mhm.
we find that there's a deficiency within our benefits program, we can incorporate that into the strategic plan for the next year, for the next, 4 years. So it would be, if we could get it on that cycle, that's something that could be pretty beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a good point. The
Go ahead, Monica.
going down to I don't know if we're ready to move on, so I'll just wait.
I think we are. I just wanted to mention that the brevity of these is because these are really pulled from the DCR director orientation information, where it explicitly talks more about the role of the personnel committee. So that's really why these are so brief here. But again, the goal is to maintain some awareness of employee concerns, which we can talk about some different ways of making those kinds of opportunities available, certainly. Whether or not the Executive Operations Committee wants to hold meetings with employees, or whatever. But also handle employee concerns and grievances. That it would be the responsible group to review and update job descriptions annually, review personnel regulations annually and update as needed, and then identify and support appropriate training, certification, and continuing education classes for certifications held. So helping to kind of, if nothing more, than just making sure that we've got a good list of training, certification requirements, and then the appropriate CEUs. We do this already. It just isn't necessarily something that we bring to the Executive Operations Committee all the time, but this is something that DCR is suggesting that we do. But we're still working on this. We're still refining our training schedule for a lot of our employees who do not require a certification. So. Are there any other thoughts on this list?
And just to be clear, we're talking about that executive operations, our Monday meeting or our meeting beforehand, right?
That's right.
So then I think for purposes of, at some point, we need to, I recognize that there's that brevity, but I think this is where there's some underlying maybe potential, can be some, that lack of that brevity might not be enough or sufficient, especially for when people come on board. And maybe looking at that a little bit. I don't know if this is the day we do this or we just set aside some time specifically, or if you would like me to kind of come up with some suggestions and think about, and then have a conversation about that space. As my child is screaming and giggling in the background.
Those are good noises.
Recording captures all of that too. But I think that, like, just to give some ideas to that would be because to me, this isn't really informative as a new board member who comes on and looks at this as from an executive ops committee perspective. And I would look at this and, it's just a little too loosey-goosey. And DCR, I think, did that purposefully because, again, based on what Debbie's mentioned multiple times, each district has their own way of working with their staff, right? And so, and or themselves. So there's a reason for the brevity and from DCR's perspective, but it also gives the us the ability to think about, well, then how do we refine it for the purposes of the organization if there's concerns, right?
Right. And some of these are going to be expanded on as we go into other sections of the personnel policies, like how to handle employee concerns and grievances. I think we need to be really explicit under that section.
Okay.
You know? And then maintaining awareness. You can see I wrote in big letters how, you know,
Yeah.
that may be a question that we want to bring to the Executive Operations Committee is how would you like to be, you know, stay aware of employees' concerns, what is appropriate and what makes the most sense. You know, so some of these things like reviewing and updating job descriptions annually, I'm not saying that the Executive Operations Committee needs to go and redline, you know, job descriptions necessarily, but that we would be bringing those, like there would be a staff involvement with that. And but also if there needs to be changes to job descriptions, say for example, we want to appoint one of our, you know, team members to be a supervisor, you know, that's a big change. And so that would be something that perhaps we would want to work together on in terms of what that looks like or authorizing that. Same thing with the personnel regulations. I would imagine that it's when we go through it, even once we complete this process, it may be like, you know what, that needs to be beefed up a little bit more. And those are, it just is a working document so that we continue to get clarity, you know, as well. So.
And when we do a deeper dive into these specific spaces, I think it'll be important to kind of do a reference to it. So this bullet point might be referenced to then the page on the process portion, right? Because I think that just on its face, it's again just a little, you know, I understand the bullet point and the brevity, but there has to be the ability to say this does have a link to a deeper dive of the process, and to understand that process and to respect the process. It's not just boom, you know, handle it, right? Like that's just kind of too, you know.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does.
But I also, you know, I kind of work better with boundaries and everybody's a little different. So it's like you know, to kind of bring that up, but to make sure that there's a link for the individuals that are coming on board, myself, that I can go directly to, you know, page 4 on the process portion, so I can understand this is how it's linked to it, right? So I'm not looking for how does this one very kind of opaque sentence actually link to something that has a very specific process attached to it. So to be able to do that would be great, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
And those 2 bullet points, I feel like might be something we can think about combining too, in the way of the awareness of employee concerns. And, you know, I would say that this goes both ways, because it's like you've got 2 bullet points on concerns and grievances, but, you know, there's also being aware of the positive of you know, the general positive impacts from staff. Just like when you sent out that wonderful email about, you know, how wonderful the community members had you know, found that your staff were doing such a great job in the field in the midst of COVID. Like that, we should highlight the positive too, right? Like I think it's not just about, you know, being aware of grievances and concerns. It should be like, be aware of, you know, the other part, the other side, because I do think that sometimes we get mired into the negative, and then it's good to reflect on the fact that this is also that we should be aware so that we can tout it to our supervisors. We can tout it to the people. We need to be able to make sure that our responsibility is to make sure that everybody in that committee is being able to communicate that well as a board and communicate it out, if that makes sense, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
Because part of our responsibility is to be able to share all the positive, wonderful things that you guys hear from the community, and to relay that on to partners in the community that maybe not hear that, oh my gosh, PS in Sully District, this happened and it was great,
Yeah.
So.
Okay. All right. Well, if you're okay with it, Monica, I'll move on to the next one, which is going to be even more fun. Look at all this wall of words here. Whoops. But this is, again, when I started to pull from some of the Fairfax County documents and just putting in place what currently, is the responsibility of the executive director, some of the things that I currently do. This is really what came into place. And so the one thing that I added was up here at the top, and it actually relates back to one of the conversations we had early when we were talking about the board of directors, and we were saying to establish new positions in consultation with the executive director. It kind of relates to this first bullet, which is my responsibility to prepare a budget request annually that outlines personnel needs to support implementation of the strategic plan. Request authorization for recommended mid-year adjustments in positions or salaries from the board of directors. So that relates to really sort of, again, what we've been doing. And I think helps to clarify a little bit, again, how that process of making personnel adjustments sort of takes place. Again, it's not just there's the process for that. That it would be administering the merit-based competitive hiring process. Again, and there's more information that we're going to be discussing about that later on in March. That we would be recommending proposed changes or updates to personnel regulations to the board of directors, to confer with and receive advice from employees upon the personnel regulations and other such matters as they deem appropriate, to use most effective methods of utilization and coordination of employee abilities and skills, publicize and recruit qualified personnel for competitive service, provided that in formulating examinations, appointing authorities shall be consulted concerning their personnel requirements and the qualifications necessary to perform the work. This is one, again, pulled from Fairfax County that I think I need to tighten up a little bit. And that we'll need to go in, again, when we get into the process of documenting the hiring policies, they use the term appointing authorities, and because Fairfax County is so large, the Board of Supervisors appoints the county executive, which actually serves in a different classification of employment. But that with department directors, they have certain appointing authorities, and so on and so forth. So I need to rework this bullet here. Sorry, this is going to look really funky when I bring it back up. So that's just a little reminder to me to kind of take another look at that. To maintain position descriptions and a compensation plan, and to prepare and recommend amendments for the board of directors. To maintain personnel records, which include class title of all positions held, a current salary or pay rate, any changes in class title, salary, or pay, records of performance evaluation, formal disciplinary actions, commendations or awards, and such data that may be deemed useful or significant in the development of a career service. And then we reviewed this one already in terms of benefit options, but then to develop and administer performance evaluations and to coordinate employee relations. Anybody want any of this? I'm just kidding. This is actually, this is a long list, but this is what we, again,
Yeah.
what we currently do.
Yeah, no, I think that's it's a good list. Um, I'm trying to think if there's, yeah, if I think of something that's, I'll let you know, but this seems comprehensive to me.
Okay.
The
one thing that I think, again, much of this information was pulled from Fairfax County for this particular component. And one of the things that it references is this compensation plan. And this would be something that I think, Chris, as a finance committee, would be really beneficial for us to really kind of take a look at in the future. Not just, making large adjustments or anything like that, but what does that look like if somebody, were to stay in a particular area? What kind of predictability could they put into that position in terms of salary adjustments in the future?
Yeah, we still have, the years of experience to try and figure out how to compare with the county. And we looked at 2 staff people, but there are still 2 others to consider. So I think there's still some work to do there as far as standardizing a method of looking at how we compare with the county, what the increases have been for each individual person over time and tracking them, and trying to understand how we compare with the market.
Right. And so I think, we can talk about this a little bit in the future, Chris, but I would like to keep that in here in terms of recognizing compensation plan, because I do think that it is something that we do need to put some time and effort in as we head into FY22.
I agree.
Is there anything else on this side? Okay, well, we'll go
no,
on.
and this is primarily, we're talking personnel, so we're not putting in additional like roles and responsibilities for you as like the partner network hub. Okay, just want to make sure that yeah, because you have a whole nother list of stuff you do. I just wanted to make sure this is specific to, okay.
Yeah, no, this just documents how really, again, the responsibilities of the executive director in administering the personnel regulations and everything.
Yeah.
So, no, the job descriptions in another place.
Yeah.
In my job description, it will say administer personnel.
Yep.
But this will really help, I think, others in terms of just, again, ensuring that consistency into the future.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, because
no, that's okay.
A little airheaded right now with the timing.
Monica, it is 8:47. It's way past our bedtimes. So, I appreciate we're all staying up here, and we're almost done. We're almost done. But I think importantly, I wanted to also incorporate Heather into this because she does play a pretty significant role when it comes to the administration of the program as well. So Heather not only supports our onboarding processes, but she also administers our payroll system. So she's running our payroll every 2 weeks, as well as year-end tax information and things like that, which we could also put in here. But Heather's also responsible for maintaining the personnel records as it relates to the current salary and pay rate and any changes in class, title, salary, or pay. So she maintains all of the tax information and everything under lock and key. So just to let you know and that we do have that division of personnel records. Again, one's financial and the other one is more performance-based, if you will. And then Heather also is fantastic about recommending proposed changes and updates to personnel policies to the executive director as well. Or so the office manager is responsible for that. Heather, what am I missing on here?
I'm
know I'm
open
missing
enrollment,
Yes.
benefits management, I think.
Holy cow.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was like, what happened to all the other stuff?
I know, right? Uh,
Now, I know that we mentioned about, identifying and providing the educational opportunities, but does Heather, do you do anything with that as well, or is that primarily?
Well, I have a membership in the Society for Human Resources Management, and I get information from them. And they also have resources. So when things come, it sort of clues me into the kinds of things that we need to be looking at. And then I do research and talk to Laura about, things that we might need to be thinking about, things that are coming down the road. For some of what we do, especially related to benefits, the county has us covered. Their policy is our policy for some of the benefits, but for other things, we're kind of on our own. So it's important for me to keep up with at least questions that we need to be asking. We also have the state association as a tremendous resource on these kinds of things. I mean, this past year, with all the different COVID regulations, that was a tremendous help to have that. Beyond that, I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. I just was thinking that, the role sometimes falls oftentimes on an office manager for just kind of making sure the records are maintained and updated for some of the trainings and certifications, and ensuring that this, having that kind of.
Yeah, I think as far as the technical staff certifications and training, my role is that I write the checks. But and I guess because that is such an individual thing as well as being a professional thing, those folks are really good at making sure to let me know what they need. But I'm not tracking that beyond the financial aspect of it.
Okay. Thank you. And then the only other question I had was for our internship, is she treated as a personnel? Is that a specific separate category that should be listed in the responsibilities arena?
She's an employee.
Okay.
The interns have been employees for several years now, based on guidance from the IRS about how. I know it's even more. I've been reading that there's even more of a concern and a sort of a crackdown on it now, but we changed that probably 5 years ago.
Probably.
4 or 5 years ago, where they actually are on our payroll and they get a W-2. Okay. So they're not treated as contractors.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was covered in case that was like somehow a separate responsibility of. It didn't fall necessarily completely under a typical personnel role, right? Like it might be another layer of responsibility that's.
Yeah, I think kind of like Laura was saying about the position description, something that dances on the line of personnel but is not personnel is my involvement in providing tax information for VCAP.
Yeah.
Because then we are issuing 1099s and it all happens as a part of the same year-end process, but it doesn't have anything to do with personnel. It just has to do with those payments that we make. There's a lot of intermingling.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
Only when you write it all out like that.
And she's coming down right now after doing all the year-end taxes as well. So, it's just in time for us to ramp up with the seedling sale. So it We always
Right.
look for those, like, you know, a couple of days where things are,
Yeah.
but no, it's, yeah, she provides a great service to all of us, certainly. So, the idea of maintaining a membership in the Society for Human Resources Management, again, Heather has that. That was something that we identified 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Heather now, that was important. Prior to Heather's arrival, we did not have any association actually with the Society for Human Resources Management. And we saw that, again, with board approval, this was incorporated into the budget. We had many, many different kinds of technical memberships, but we didn't have anything that was associated with just operations. And so I'm really proud that we've got a membership there. And as Heather mentioned, it's a wonderful resource. So when we've got questions, you know, we could certainly refer back to that. And who knows, maybe one day we may have a certified, you know, SHRM certified person as well. Human
My husband
resources
used to work
manager.
there.
Who's that?
My husband used to work there in the public affairs portion.
Did he really? Oh, how about
Yeah,
that?
he was a SHRMie.
Sure.
He was a Shermie. That's great.
Yeah, it helps us to know what questions we need to ask.
Yeah.
That's, you know, and sometimes that's the hardest part. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And we get some really nice little, you know, reference materials and things like that, like, you know, HR magazines and stuff. So, I mean, it's important. It's important, again, in terms of just demonstrating the well-roundedness that we are as an organization. So,
Yeah.
so to maintain that, you know, or whatnot, I don't know if that necessarily needs to go into our policy document, but maybe that could be, you know,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I'm just going to put it there as a placeholder for consideration later. Heather, is there anything else that I'm missing on here?
I can't think of anything. I'm sure there might be something. I don't know, like the timesheet aspect of things, maintaining the timesheets. That's, you know, payroll related. So,
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, you know, as we have some time to kind of let this settle in our minds, we can always come back and add a little bit more if necessary. But it's a pretty good long list you got there, Heather.
yeah.
You do a lot for all of us, for sure. So this was another aspect, you know, again, of the county's policies, where it just kind of a little bit concisely talks about who's going to be maintaining what and things like that. And so just to translate it based upon, again, our various groups, is that our personnel regulations would be maintained by the executive director after approval by the board of directors. Personnel regulations shall be reviewed annually by the Executive Operations Committee, and that the executive director shall draft proposed changes to personnel regulations with appropriate consultation, kind of like what we're doing now. The board of directors shall adopt personnel regulations when such actions are in the best interest of sound public personnel administration. And then, you know, again, this just kind of summarizes that our personnel regulations will provide for equal employment opportunity. They will outline the method for holding competitive examinations, certification, and appointment of applications, the administration of position descriptions and a compensation plan, methods of promotion, application and service ratings, so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. And really what this is everything that we're going to be working on essentially this spring over the next 5 months. One of the aspects that they also had was reference to things like veterans preference, things like that. We do not currently have anything that states that we have a veterans preference. I mean, we certainly could. So that's a question of, do we want to acknowledge anything else, you know, in relation to our priorities? And we don't have to answer that today. That could be a question, again, we bring up to the Executive Ops Committee.
Now, I'm just curious about this language from a equal employment opportunity, because I know that there's been so much, and it's going to continue to grow, at least in this, for the next few years, the language for equity and that kind of space. I don't know, you know, what our language is or if it's been adjusted over time, but I know that there's been much more bolstering of certain verbiage to kind of strengthen around the issue of hiring and practices around.
I think it can be revisited. We do have a EEO policy on our books right now.
Yeah.
But I think that there's an opportunity, certainly through this process, to align it. You know, I mean, I know we went through that process with the state association recently as well. And so that might be a good model for us.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I would just like to take a peek at it again, just to make sure we're on the front end of, because the environmental world's moving into that sphere, and you guys have it. So I'm not saying, but just to see what the words are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would bring it to the board about veterans preference. I don't know, you know, yeah. We are in a high military area, you know.
Yeah.
Something for consideration, but I'm not sure.
Certainly bring that language in as well. That's it. All I got for today.
Woo! 9 o'clock, I'll take it.
So I think, we've made some revisions, and what my plan is to go back through and put this we can keep it in PowerPoint, of course, but make those revisions, certainly make some of these. I've written down a number of notes, and I know Heather's also been capturing some of our discussion as well, in terms of just, you know, how we want this to look, certainly. But we'll document this and put it in a framework so we could present it to the Executive Operations Committee in later on this month.
And did you want me, so from my perspective of follow-up, did you want me to see if I can tighten the words on that one for the executive board, or?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, Monica, again, we've got some time, so we didn't necessarily settle on a whole lot today in terms of, you know, things, but I think when we meet next time, so on the 18th, why don't we plan on, if you can provide me with any of your updates, and then we can review them one more time together, and then jump into the next phase. Maybe that's a way of doing each one of these meetings, is just to check in, you know, on the last discussion, and just sort of see where we're at.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just put it in and see if there's.
So I will send this to you, Monica.
Okay.
I'll send this around to everybody, a little bit of a revised version here.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this in the evening.
No, not a problem. I mean, I
know everyone's tired. It's a long day for you all as well, and I really appreciate it.
It's not a problem, Monica. I'm glad that we could find time on your schedule. I know it's really busy with a new job and kids still at school and all sorts of stuff. So I know you're juggling a lot of things. I can completely empathize with you. So
And Monica, Laura knows this, but there's a hidden silver lining to having meetings in the evening, and that is my family, my son and my husband are stepping up and making dinner. So Laura and I told Laura we need to have night meetings because yesterday she and I were meeting into the evening, and I started to smell the smell of food, and my husband, who does not cook, had put together a meal, and
a meal.
It was actually a HelloFresh
Yes.
prepared meal. So
I'll
it was
take it.
he followed the directions, but I can't tell you how nice it was to walk out of this home office and just be able to eat dinner and not have to do it myself. So
Heather, I believe that's
so now Thursday nights, every other Thursday night, I'm going to count on it.
That's right. That's right. I'm going to purposefully hold you even longer just so that you get a nice meal out of it, Heather. I'm so proud of Ken.
Tonight is, I heard my son cooking, and it's hot honey chicken. So,
ooh, that sounds great. That sounds really, really, really good.
So a side effect, a nice positive.
I just went through a box of Girl Scout cookies. I think that's all I had for dinner.
Hey, that works too.
Just kidding, sort of.
Oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah, right.
Well, is there anything else? Chris, do you have anything else that you want to add while we've got you here?
Not at the moment. But if you sent the PowerPoints out, I might have some comments.
Okay. Yep, we'll make sure that we include you on that too. But all right. Well, why don't we call it a night? I'm going to, if it's okay, I'm going to end hold on, I'm going to try and find it. It's 9:06 and I am going to end our recording.
Thank you.
Meeting. So thank you.
Turning off.